Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, reflections from DOD's first ever customer experience officer. Savan Kong joins the podcast to discuss the Pentagon's progress in digital experience. It's Tuesday, March 25th, 2025. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. Now let's dive into the day's top headlines. FedRAMP is getting another overhaul, one that will involve far more automation and a greater role for the private sector, the program's chief announced on Monday. Through FedRAMP 20X, the General Services Administration-based team focused on the program aims to simplify the authorization process and reduce the amount of time needed to approve a service from months to weeks, Director Pete Waterman said during an Alliance for Digital Innovation event on Monday. The private sector will also have increased responsibility over monitoring of their systems, he noted. In a critical change, agency sponsorship will eventually no longer be necessary to earn an authorization. For the time being, companies must find a federal agency to shepherd them through the FedRAMP process, which can be time-intensive and expensive. FedRAMP will also move from a baseline checklist approach for security and instead use key indicators as an abstract layer to align government compliance and modern security best practices. Waterman pointed to the example of encryption, which could be measured by a compliance tool built into code or ensured through services that override non-encrypted communications to meet that goal, rather than having a person look at a spreadsheet. So instead of having humans reviewing paper-based records, Waterman said, machines will provide validation capabilities. As a first step, FedRAMP has launched 4 community working groups, which give the public a chance to share feedback and focus on creating innovative solutions to formalize the program's standards. But in the meantime, Waterman said existing baselines will remain in place and that there are no immediate changes to the program. It's not yet clear how companies, assessors, and agencies that work within the FedRAMP structure will respond to the changes, though some initial reactions from cloud service providers were pretty positive. Brian Conrad, the authorizing authority liaison at Zscaler and the former acting administrator of FedRAMP, called their move a promising step. And Jessica Salmoraghi, who represents the Business Software Alliance, a technology industry trade group, similarly said the pivot was, quote, an encouraging sign. In other news, the Office of Personnel Management and the Departments of Treasury and Education are now barred from sharing individuals' personally identifiable information with DOJ representatives, a federal judge ruled on Monday. Judge Deborah Boardman of the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland said in her decision that in granting associates with Elon Musk's so-called government efficiency initiative access to systems containing plaintiffs' PII, the agencies likely violated the Privacy Act and the Administrative Procedure Act. The plaintiffs, which were represented by a variety of federal associations and employee unions, as well as 6 military veterans, specifically cited the exposure of their PII to DOJ associates in Treasury's Bureau of Fiscal Service, which includes names, social security numbers, birth dates, birthplaces, home addresses, and telephone numbers, email addresses, and bank account information of Americans who have transacted with the federal government. For education, the plaintiffs focused their case on the management of the federal student loan system. And as the government's Human Resources Office, OPM, quote, maintains a host of systems with information about federal government personnel, the suit noted. The plaintiffs alleged that the unrestricted access to those systems provided to DOJ violated the Privacy Act because none of the parties, quote, requested disclosure or provided express written consent to the disclosure of their information to DOJ representatives. Additionally, they contended that DOJ staffers did not need to know their personal information to carry out their duties. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. After serving nearly 18 months as the Department of Defense's first ever customer experience officer in the Office of the CIO, Savan Kong earlier this month parted ways with the Pentagon. Previously a member of the Defense Digital Services team during his first tour of duty with the DOD, Kong helped build the department's CXO office from scratch, fostering a culture that prioritizes the needs of service members, civilians, and mission partners, and striving to streamline governance processes, improve transparency, and ensure that IT solutions meet operational needs. Kong joined me for a conversation to share the progress his office ushered in to improve customer experience for DOD's personnel, where things are headed under this new administration, and how AI will impact the CX space going forward. Let's go now to that conversation with Savan Kong. Savan, so good to see you. Thanks for joining me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Billy. Pleasure to be here.
We go back. I feel like I met you 4 or 5 years ago now when you were first at Defense Digital Service on your first tour of duty with the DOD, and you came back. I really think it's a good opportunity to kind of have you on, chat about some of the progress made there, and sort of get a sense of where things are going amid all these changes in this current administration. So thanks so much for joining me, and excited to dig in.
Yeah, appreciate it, Billy.
Let's dive in. I think I grapple with, and especially with some of the changes amid this ongoing administration. The DOD is positioned as this organization that really prioritizes and feeds into lethality and readiness. Those are the flagpoles that top mission sets that it's focused on. So, as a starter question, given that your role over the past year or so at the DOD had been focused on experience, tell me where digital customer experience really falls into that larger mission set and why it's so important and impactful in an organization that's focused on defense, lethality, and readiness.
Yeah, that's a great question, Billy. Part of what we're doing within CXO is really helping to frame the department to become outcome driven. And so, we talk a lot about, what it is that we want to get out of the body of work that we're doing versus, how do we get there? And so, part of being customer driven and customer focused is it helps reorient the organization in a way where you could take a look at the outcome of what it is that we're trying to do versus how we're trying to get there, or versus, tangential experiences. And by doing so, it'll help us then streamline decisions that we make in terms of investments, the type of talent that we need, and really sort of focus on, the things that we want to get out of the bodies of work that we're investing in. And so from a CX perspective, that is really sort of like what it boils down to, right? It's pretty simple, but the devil's in the details when we're trying to get there.
That's great. And I think that's a great context to start our conversation on. So again, you were the first ever customer experience officer for the department. Tell me about your time in that role, what you were tasked with, like what was really the impetus to have the department focus on this, and why that moment was so important. And I guess what was the momentum that you think you built during that time?
Yeah, that's a multi-layered question, Billy. There's a lot to unpack there. I think it all stems from the organization really feeling the need, or having the need to have a CX oriented office. And that comes from a couple of different places, right? So there's outside pressure from Congress, knowing that we need to improve lethality and our support of the warfighters. You've got pressure from the actual warfighters and the people supporting them, being very vocal, either on LinkedIn or social media, saying, hey, like, this is not doing what we need it to do. And then you have sort of the internal support from leadership. In this case, it was John Sherman, the former CIO, really raising his hand and saying, hey, we need to invest in customer experience. And I think you package all those things up, and over time, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, they made the decision to stand up the office. And I will say, when John and I initially talked, it was a pretty interesting conversation, because I didn't really know what that entailed either. We just knew that the need was there. We knew that we need to invest in it. But, trying to figure out how we're going about doing that was really open-ended. And so, he reached out, and, we figured it out as we started the office. It's been a wild year and a half of, changing landscapes and changing things. But I think what we ultimately produced at the end was absolutely beneficial for the warfighter.
And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's a oversimplified way of thinking about it, but I think a lot of it ties back to that fix our computers moment that kind of gained some steam across the department. This predates you being within the actual organization, but I think it was maybe 2022, early 2022 when this was all going on. Folks kind of became just upset with their ability to use some of the basic technology at the Department of Defense. And so is that the impetus, and has progress been made in that direction?
Yeah, that was one of the things that that really sort of drew our attention. I think there's other things, like we had a Defense Business Board report that was not the greatest, right? It really highlighted a lot of the deficiencies that we had in the department. And I think there's pressure also from Congress in different ways, saying, hey, like we've got to improve these things. And really all those things, what they highlighted was that we've got disparate sort of voices and feedback from all these different places. How do we actually gather that in a centralized way where we can then start to produce some sort of approach and then mobilize the commitment so we can actually start to make sustained gains that can be enduring, right? That goes beyond me and goes beyond the CXO office itself. So, all those things put together really sort of was we were essentially the culmination of a lot of those things.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. And it sounds like some momentum is built. There was, a strategy that you put out. I'm blanking on the name of it right now.
Fulcrum. Fulcrum. Yep.
Fulcrum. So tell me more about the momentum and Fulcrum and how that really moved to bring about some change in the department.
Yeah, that's a great question, Billy. Fulcrum is really just one of the pieces that we knew was important for us to go back in and revisit. It was actually very timely with the digital modernization strategy at the end of its life cycle. We had the opportunity to really take a step back and look at our IT advancement strategy from the ground up. And so what we did that was very different than our previous digital modernization strategy is we went and we actually took individuals that were subject matter experts, and we brought them into a room, and we sat there for days on end, and we made sure that we got the voice of the users, right, of the customers, people actually that are doing the work into that document. And so the DNA of Fulcrum really stems from, the subject matter experts coming in and really contributing a lot of what they're seeing out in the field. And the reason why Fulcrum is important is because it gives us an authoritative way to point back to something that really highlights user experience, right, as an important keystone of what it is that we need to be focusing on for the next 5 years. And without something authoritative, especially in a place like the Department of Defense, it is exceptionally hard for people to do anything, right? Unless you have some sort of document or memo or something signed, because we all have competing priorities all the time. And Fulcrum was really sort of a big piece of that work to get us some sort of voice, some strategy, some partner that people can look at that's department wide and really mobilize against.
So let's take it back a bit because, as you've just described, this is a pretty big challenge within a pretty big organization. So, and as I described at the top of the interview, you had been in the Department of Defense before as a member of the Defense Digital Service. You left for a bit and then returned in this role. So what really drew you to taking on this challenge? What made you want to return to the department and face, what is perceived to be a pretty big challenge?
Yeah, that's a good question. After I left DDS, I was feeling honestly pretty burnt out. One of my last projects was working on Operation Allies Refuge, which was the evacuation of Afghanistan. And, towards the tail end of that, I was like, okay, I'm going to need a break from defense. And so I went to the private sector for a little bit. But, I think it's a couple things. The first one is just having the ability to build something from scratch. I'm inherently a entrepreneur. I like, taking something from nothing and then really organically growing that and sustaining that. So that sort of like scratched that itch. The second piece of that was, throughout our time at DDS, our cornerstone was really, making sure that the users were represented, understanding the problems and doing the things necessary, just from a, human-centered design perspective to be able to get to the root of why we're actually doing the things we're doing. And so, for me, it was taking a lot of those principles and scaling that right beyond projects. And, DDS was exceptionally great about being sort of precision oriented, really hitting the unit on the head with specific projects. But we couldn't sort of like affect change at a massive scale. And that really sort of like, for me, was a big deal with CXO was I can affect good human-centered design on a massive scale.
It's great to hear. And it's been interesting to see you fill this role and all the momentum you've made. I do want to dive in a bit. A lot has changed in recent weeks and months with the new administration, and there's been a myriad of challenges that are ongoing during it. One of the big ones is the rollback of DEI efforts across the Pentagon and across the government writ large. And I think in a large sense, when you think of DEI and the inclusion aspects, that a lot of that feeds into accessibility, and accessibility is a major component of good CX, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to experience it and use the digital technology and tools that the department provides. So I'm curious, with some of those rollbacks and some of the focus pulled away from that, potentially pulled back from accessibility and usability of those products, how might that change the ability for the department to do good CX work?
I think you're definitely right, Billy. I think there will be a change. And I've had a few weeks to reflect on what this looks like. And, I think one of the things about change is, especially now, having the chance to sort of take a look at it from the outside in, inherently we think that change is bad, but really there's no right or wrong with change. There's really just a different, set of circumstances and realities that we have and that we have to work with. Specifically around accessibility, I think the need for us to cater to all service members or all of the people that are supporting service members across the department will still be there. That need won't be gone just because we have a new administration and I think the opportunity in front of the new administration and whoever takes up the mantle of CXO moving forward is, how do you continue to support all of your service members, increase lethality, increase readiness, but potentially with a different set of requirements, different set of talent, maybe a different set of tools. We talk a lot about AI just across the board. And, I think it's potentially a good opportunity to leverage technology to do some of the things that maybe were very manual. I'm generally an optimistic person by nature. And I think, with all change, there's opportunities for improvement, right? And I think the department is in that position right now.
Yeah, and I think it takes folks like yourself and others and whoever's going to take in this role to champion it and do it the right way. And I think that's how change that improves things happens. So that's good to hear. And you mentioned AI, and I think that's also a massive topic at the top of everyone's mind in this administration. Obviously, there was a lot of change and drive towards AI during the last year of the previous administration. But we get a sense with a lot of the changes that are ongoing, whether that's the drive of efficiency versus or via workforce and contract cuts, that we think AI is probably going to be something that this administration really looks to lean on. So what does that look like? How do you think that is going to play a role in driving some of that experience and improved outcomes for the department, and also some of those efficiencies?
Whew. How long is our segment, Billy? there's a lot to unpack there, my friend. I think at the core of it, and I believe I spoke to AI in a previous fireside chat I had with Brandy, which seems like a lifetime ago, but I'll echo. Yeah,
last year, yeah.
Exactly. I'll echo my same sentiments, right? I think AI is only as good as if it can actually start to solve real problems that we're seeing, right? Understanding those fundamental problems, and being able to deploy solutions, whether it's AI or talent or manual labor, is going to be a decision that they need to make. And if there's improvements that they can make at a faster scale that touches upon a broader customer base, then by all means use AI, right? Deploy those systems. I think the challenge that the department will have is, how do you quickly sort of test out those capabilities in a way where you can then deploy them downrange in a manner that is keeping up to pace with the technology that's out there. And I think that'll be one of their biggest challenges, because the advancements in AI nowadays is incredibly fast for anybody, whether you're in the DOD or federal government or in industry. And we're all sort of just trying to keep pace of all those things. But the challenge that we have is there's a lot of shiny toys out there, but which ones are actually going to be beneficial for the warfighter? And that's going to be the challenge.
That's great feedback. As we get to the end of the conversation here, I think of you as sort of representative, a great model of the type of tech talent that is the DOD has been capable and able to bring into its workforce. There's been a large push as long as I've been around covering this space, that the DOD really wants to look to, non-traditional places outside of the Beltway, outside of the military, outside of the government workforce, to bring that talent in. So you're, again, an example of that, coming in at, in your career to serve at DDS and then returning for the CXO role. But, it remains to be seen, based on some of the events that are unfolded recently with layoffs and reductions in force, and how that might impact the DoD's ability moving forward because of that experience. So I'm just curious, trying to wrap that all together. There's been big strides and big efforts, investments put into recruiting that talent, but now it seems that might be pulled back in a different direction, because the department is letting go potentially of a lot of that talent that it's hired, or creating an ecosystem where people who might perceive or have previously thought to, apply for a job with the DoD or see a career path within the DoD now see it as one that could come with layoffs or, some difficulty in maintaining a job. So what's your thoughts with all that, based on the efforts the DoD has had to recruit tech talent, and now with everything that's going on to reduce the force?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple things that we can touch on here. What drew me to DDS initially was I had no interest in joining the Department of Defense. It never crossed my mind. Had a conversation with Chris Lynch, who is the founder of DDS, and he had convinced me to visit. And, long story short, I ended up, going out and spending 4 years of my life, supporting the mission. And really, that the ability to communicate the importance of the mission is a very important thing for the department to do. And I think we do that very well within the military departments, but we don't do that very well on the civilian side. So knowing that is something that is important, how do you reach as many people as possible, and really onboard them in an efficient way? I think the challenges that we have now with this return to office mandate is, and this is my own personal opinion, is the remote nature of the work that we did was exceptionally valuable, because you're getting people from all across the world, really, and that diversity and thought and lived experiences especially as we get into this realm of artificial intelligence and biases, right? Like you want to have as much of a breadth of knowledge as possible. And I think, by reducing sort of that breadth of knowledge to just physical proximity, could be something that they're going to be challenged with in the future. I think that's the first piece. The second piece is for people that have never applied to work in federal government, that are in industry or academia that want to, the one thing they don't know and that nobody ever told me was it's damn hard. It takes a long time, right? Like you're going through, your background clearances, you're filling out tons of paperwork. And for most Americans that want to join the DOD, it is a month-long process or multi-month, depending on who you are. Like mine took, multiple months just because I was a refugee. I didn't sort of check the vanilla boxes of, okay, this guy's, pretty easy to clear. And for Americans that are living either paycheck to paycheck or, month to month, you can't wait that long to be onboarded to the government, right? It's just an impossibility. And so, and I know that they're making a lot of strides in reducing that amount of time, but it's still something that is out there. And until they actually do that, for a regular, civilian that's working in industry that wants to come over, that barrier is still there and it's still really hard.
Yeah, I think we're doing some research on this the other day, and it's something like the average time to hire from when you make the offer to someone is still 110 days across the government. I know some organizations have expedited hiring authorities and things of that nature, which can trim it down, but it's still a long process. And then on your point about the remote work, it's, if you want to attract tech talent, people largely, who live in other communities that aren't in the Beltway and, can't make it to the Pentagon every day. A lot of people are not going to be able to upend their lives to go move jobs. So that definitely rings clear. And I recognize that that's how you were able to do it and why you were able to join. So it's interesting to say the least to try to understand how the department's going to be able to retain and, hire new tech talent moving forward.
Yeah. It's a different world, right? Different administration, new requirements, with, still the need to be customer focused will be there. The need to be ready and lethal will still be there. These are all things that don't change. But it's just the circumstances and the requirements are a little bit different, right? And that's going to be the opportunity that they have in front of them.
Yep. Well, I appreciate your positive and optimistic outlook on it. I wish you the best of luck. It's always great to chat and catch up with you. You've done some great work, and I think as an American, I appreciate that. And, thank you for your service. And hopefully we can do more of this in the future. It's always great to hear what's on your mind and get a chance to chat.
Absolutely, Billy. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Savan. For more on federal digital experience, visit fedscoop.com. The Daily Scoop podcast is available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes. Until then, I'm your host, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.